This is a story about a dude named Lane. He moved to the mainland and bought one place to stay. And then one day he went, tried to rent them out. And then he became one real investor man. Hey everybody, Lane here with Simple Passive Cashflow Podcast. I got Jorge Newbery on the line. Was looking to place my money somewhere in between deals. Somebody told me to contact George, who's out of Chicago, Illinois. He's got this fund who I got to know pretty well. And his interesting thing is that he went $17 million in the hole. So I had to get to know this guy. Bring him on. How are you doing, George?
Good. How about you, Lane?
Awesome. And just to cue up some of the people up there kind of taking a nap at this point, George has got a free book we're going to give away at the end to everybody who shoots me an email asking for it with their address. Now that everybody's awake with free stuff, George, how much simple passive cash flow are you making today, and how are you doing it?
I invest in our fund. I do as I encourage others to do, which is to invest in American Homeowner Preservation. We pay a good return, and so that's where my wife and I put most of our money. And we're the manager of the fund, but we're also one of the larger investors in the assorted funds. In terms of apartment investing, I've done that, and a lot of real estate investing in the past, and there's certainly made a lot of money doing it. But at this point, it's easier simply to have it in the fund that I have regular control over.
So this fund, what are you guys investing in?
So what we do is we purchase pools of defaulted mortgages from banks and hedge funds, and these are typically loans that are not paying, most frequently in low and moderate income neighborhoods, which is where you can get the biggest margins, the biggest discounts. Then our goal is to achieve consensual solutions with the families. So to give you an example, someone may owe $100 on a home that's now worth $50. We'll go and offer them basically whatever they want to do. If they want to do a mod, we can drop the principal to $50. We can drop their payment, which may be $800. We can drop it down to $500. And I think most significantly is in most cases they haven't paid in 2, 3, 4 years, so they owe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in back payments and late charges and legal fees. That was usually done on someone else's dime. So we're basically just bought the loan. We can probably buy a loan like that for $15,000. But now we're going to the homeowner and saying, hey, if you wanted all those years of back payments, give us typically $2,000, and then we'll give you a fresh slate. You can start out from here. So give us $2,000 now, $500 a month for the remaining term of the loan, which is off 20-some years, and you can stay in your home. And that's oftentimes transformative for the family and something they want to stay. That's what they do. The payment we offer is typically cheaper than rent. It just makes a lot of sense, and we can accomplish that by sharing some of the discount with the family. If they've already left or they don't want to stay, we'll offer them cash for a deed in lieu, typically $1,000. They sign a deed in lieu. We can avoid the foreclosure process. It gets us to the point of being able to sell that property much faster. And we typically, by the time we get the properties, they're often not in great shape. So we're selling them typically to investors who then buy them and repair them and resell them, or repair them and rent them. And that's kind of the model. And once in a while, people can do a discounted settlement. Let's say the home is only worth $30,000. We can offer that we can settle it for $25,000. And that family may, between friends and family or cashing in an IRA or whatever, however they get the money, sometimes they come up with the cash and just own it outright. And they may, despite having owed 100 or more oftentimes. So that's what we do. And it's the goal is consensual, speedy resolutions. And if we can, turn $15,000 into 30 or into 20 years worth of cash flow, $6,500 a month, that's $6,000 a year for $15,000. We get $2,000 up front. Those are all things that generate very significant returns. We do everything we can to avoid having to go to court and be spending attorney's fees while the homeowner's attorney is spending attorney's fees, although that does happen. We try to avoid it, but it's inevitable in some cases. And even then, that's probably our worst option when it's we have to foreclose, and oftentimes it takes a year and a few thousand in legal fees and some property taxes that accrue. So it eats into the returns, but we still usually come out okay on there, but the returns are going to be a lot less than if we can achieve something fast in cooperation with the borrower.
So you're purchasing non-performing or performing notes?
Absolutely non-performing. The performing loans would be priced much higher, and they're more of a passive investment. This is an active. Personally, I invest in the fund, which is a passive investment, but as the manager of the fund, that's a very active undertaking.
For like a performing note, what would you say the typical return percentage-wise, just so we can compare it to other investments? And then
Also, what is it for non-performing? If you were to do this
Sure.
yourself and build the systems.
On a performing, most people are shooting for high single digits or low teens, and that'll probably, pricing to those numbers, you'll probably be competitive in buying performing notes. And then you can get probably an even higher return if you go to, low to moderate income neighborhoods where the property values are low, or commercial, something kind of weird. Those you may get a little bit extra yield. If you're non-performing, historically we've generated over 20%. I have to always say where, past performance is not indicative of future performance, but nevertheless, that gives you an idea of where we've come out. And it's often, in the high 20s, even sometimes some of the funds are still in the 30s. Now that usually drops with time. And why I say that is, let's say you buy 100 loans today, then those ones that resolve fast, those returns are going to be 50, 60% sometimes, even more, especially when you factor that you put out 15 today and you get back 40 in 3 months. That's going to be just a home run, and that's going to be a huge, huge return on investment. But then there's going to be those ones that take 2 or 3 years to resolve, and those will drag the return. So the return will pop, out of the box in the first few months on the loans that go down kind of the fast consensual route. But then those ones that linger and take longer to resolve will slowly, the return will drop. But it's still, even though it drops, our oldest online fund is from late 2013, and that's still over 20%.
You don't get that steady state until you get about 100 notes or so.
You could say the same thing for 5 or 10. The reality is, in this business, you will lose money on some loans. I think every fund in the country will lose, of any significance, is going to lose money on some loans. As the pool gets smaller and smaller, you buy 5 loans. The problem is, if you bought the 5 loans that we bought 100 and we lose on 10, let's say, then you buy 5. The theory is you may only lose on 1, but what if you bought, what if you lose on 2? Now your returns are really going to be negatively impacted. So it really helps to do this on a larger scale and kind of spread your risk, because the investments can be in non-performing loans, can be much more hard to predict what the outcome is going to be. We do our best to try to analyze, we do our due diligence up front in terms of checking taxes, checking values, checking any code enforcement or anything, or any other city violations. Try to maybe review the servicer comments and get an idea of what's the disposition of the homeowner. Are they going to fight? Are they going to are they trying to mod with Bank of America, and Bank of America just refused to give them a mod? We show up, hey, do you want to do a mod? And they say, yeah, great. That's easy. But if they're contentious or whatnot, and, it's unknown whether they'll continue to be contentious, that's one that could go wrong. A vacant home, becomes in most cases more risky. The chances it could be worth 50 today, gets vandalized this weekend, it could be worth 30 on Monday. That is, or less. And that's a big risk, especially if you paid 25 today or 20 today thinking it's worth 50, and, someone strips all the copper and they leave the water running, and show up Monday and you're literally underwater on your investment, before you get out of the gate. And now you're having to pay for legal fees and take care of work. So those things, and kind of example has happened to us, and it happens probably to everybody who does it at scale. And we buy across the country. We get the best deal, good pricing, because big banks and hedge funds can sell to us and know that we're not care about geography. So they have a loan in Puerto Rico or a loan in Alaska, Hawaii. Well, Hawaii's pretty desirable, but Kansas or wherever, some wildly disparate places geographically, we'll buy them all. And that is something which helps us get pretty attractive pricing on these things.
So I actually looked a few years back into this notes stuff. For me, it wasn't for me. I was looking to leverage and kind of do it myself with the turnkey rentals and then going into apartments now. One of the main things for me was, for a single buyer like myself, it's hard to get access to these good notes, because I guess what happens is, there's thousands and thousands of notes on these spreadsheets called tapes. And by the time you get to someone like me, there's all the crap there. Maybe enlighten us on how does the rungs of buyers get distributed, and how do you get the best pricing on these notes?
The best pricing is in the bigger pools when you're coming straight out of a bank or a hedge fund that is not working these things in a really entrepreneurial fashion. So we bought from Citibank. We just did a big trade last week. It was 209 loans. We bought it from Angelo Gordon, which is a big real estate fund. And it was part of a huge pool of Bank of America loans that they bought a year or so ago, and I think they worked some, clearly didn't work the lower value ones very well. So most of these loans that could just kind of sat at their servicers for a year, and now they're saying, hey, nothing's going on with these, let's sell them. So we bought them really pretty cheap, and that's the best way, because they haven't been tended to. You can go out and, the people in their homes, no one's been working with them. You show up and, hey, I can make you a deal. They're like, great. In many cases, contrast that with you buy a loan that's non-performing from a smaller entrepreneurial fund who's kind of figured out, hey, give them a ma, give them a D-Lou. Okay, nothing's working. Oh, I see problems or whatnot. I'm going to sell this loan. And they try to sell them in, ones or very small pools. And not to say they're all like that. They're basically, people are selling loans because they see a problem, or it could be timing reasons, but mostly they see a problem or it's just not going to be resolved promptly. So they sell it, maybe to a retail investor who maybe because they're local to the loan or they're more hands-on, maybe they'll get a better result. But the easy ones are probably already picked out of there and resolved. For instance, the pool we just bought last week, 209 loans. If everything goes well, we could resolve, a third or more in the first several months. And those are the easy ones. And then the longer ones, we'll deal with them. But as you go up the food chain, it's definitely you get better deals.
Before you've been into this notes, you had an earlier life. What's your Han Solo moment where you took a pivot point and got to where you are today?
So here's what happened. I did probably what many of your listeners either are doing or aspiring to do, which is to buy real estate. And, in 1992, I bought a 4-unit building. A couple months later, I bought a 19-unit building, then a 60-unit building. I kept building up and up. This was in Southern California. Final building I bought in LA was 298 units in downtown Los Angeles. So I got in about to 500 plus units. And then I started buying out of state. The first building I bought out of state was 233 units in Kansas City. And then I kept buying these 200 and 300 unit complexes around the country until I bought, one of the biggest complexes in the whole country, which was 1,100 units in Columbus, Ohio. And that was, I bought it for $13.5 million, bankruptcy court auction, great location. It was an odd situation that it was primarily low-income tenants, but it backed into one of the highest income neighborhoods in the city. Unbeknownst to me, the city had kind of said, hey, it'd be great that this low-income property was not there. It was in kind of the way of some planned development. They built a VA hospital across the street. But I owned the property, and I did a good job turning it around. But then it was hit by an ice storm, and the ice storm just devastated the property. In the aftermath of the storm, I was kind of brought to my financial knees. And it was just a dramatic turnaround in a bad way. Over about 18 months, what happened is the insurance, we were well insured. We had almost $50 million in insurance, but unbeknownst to me, I'd never been involved in a massive insurance claim before, that the insurance companies, as the claims get big, they just find ways to not pay. And the goal, apparently, is to not pay as long as possible, make you file a lawsuit, and eventually, the longer it goes, the more desperate you may get and become willing to take a discounted, something less than what you're really entitled to. And that's exactly what happened here.
And this is Woodland Metals, if people want to Google that, in Columbus. One of the big topics in your book, Burn Zones, that will be given away later.
Exactly. That was my big burn zone. Actually, the whole book gives you the insight into the run up, how I made all the money, and the success that I achieved. And then, as you put it, my Han Solo moment, which happened when all this started collapsing. And what I made some mistakes. I was optimistic. I'm always optimistic. Which is not always good, that the insurance company would settle, like they should have pretty promptly, and they didn't. But in the meantime, I said, well, I'll borrow my other properties. At that point, I had 4,000 units across the country. And so I started taking out loans on those and using that money to rebuild Woodland Meadows with the expectation that at some point the insurance company would settle and then I'll pay back those loans. But what happened is, as it got close to a year going by, I ran out of money. I couldn't borrow anymore. I'd used all my personal money. The property still wasn't done, and there was still a long way to go. So the city became very aggressive trying to knock me out. And they
because you were in the path of progress right there.
Yeah, exactly. And I had no idea how, that everything was stacked against me. I was kind of naive in that regard. They tried to they said that there had 122 buildings at this property. They issued emergency evacuation orders saying that they had discovered that the prior owner had taken some construction shortcuts, and as a result, all the buildings were subject to imminent collapse, which was, it was a farce. but it was the city saying it. So I hired an engineer. He did a study and came back and said, there's no problem. So we went to court to get a temporary restraining orders against the city to stop this evacuation. And in court, the city admitted they had nothing. There was no real evidence to back up this imminent collapse theory. So they backed off, and the court said, hey, you have 6 months to fix this property, and you better work something out quick with the insurance company, and we're going to have a court monitor who's going to show up at the property every week to report back to the court and make sure you're on schedule. And so I made a deal with the insurance company, or my attorney did actually, and we settled for $32 million, which is just an astronomical amount of money. Now the problem was it wasn't enough to fix it, and I'd already spent, I forgot that number at the time, but it was $20-ish million or more. I received the $32 million, paid back some of the contractors, and then I was using the money in a hurry to get this 6 months. I said, hey, I'm going to get this done faster. So we had like 300 people a day working at the property, and the court was coming out every week, the court monitor, reporting back to the court that, hey, we're ahead of schedule, great, everything's going great. But what I didn't know was that the city went around to HUD and said, hey, pull this guy's contracts. And so HUD came out and said, hey, there's some damages. And I said, well, yeah, it's from the storm, but you can see we're fixing it up. And they said, well, you have 30 days to fix all this damage. And this was an almost impossible request. And so I went to court and said, hey, you gave me 6 months. HUD's given me 30 days. I just can't get it done in 30 days. And so the court ordered that HUD appear and kind of justify their actions. And HUD replied that they're a federal agency and they're not responsible. They're not bound by any municipal court. So HUD pulled the contracts after the end of 30 days. They came back. They were there for about 10 minutes, and they said, oh, you're not done. And I said, no, I'm not, but I'm working. You can see all this work. And so HUD pulled the contracts. At that point, that's the point where it's really the pivot point. All the tenants had pretty much were behind me up until that point, because then HUD, not only did they pull the contracts, they came out and said every tenant there, which there are 800 plus tenants, gets a free voucher that they can take anywhere. And so at that point, everybody was no longer supporting me and said, well, I got to look out for my family and whatnot. We're going to take this voucher and move out to the suburbs, or some of them even moved out of state and took the voucher with them. And these are Section 8 vouchers. So that was the turning point. So pretty soon the city succeeded in vacating the property. I became the legal battle went on a little ways, but I was running on financial fumes at that point. I had exhausted all that insurance money. Now I still had debt on these other properties. So over the next 18 months, I pretty much lost everything. And you said earlier I ended up $17 million in debt. I actually ended up $26 million in debt. And the a lot of that was personal guarantees on some of these notes and whatnot. And as it was a shattering experience. And debt can be a great friend, because I leveraged my way through. I made some money, so I usually had good money to put in, but I took big leverage on some of these deals, big loans. That was great in the run up, but once it started collapsing, that debt adds up pretty fast, late charges, court fees and whatnot. And I was just getting default interest rate. I just got buried under this mountain that I couldn't recover from, and or I couldn't pay. So I made deals with some of the creditors. Some were aggressive, and those are the ones that if I didn't have the $8 million that you're trying to get from me, then I'm not going to be able to pay it. I never filed bankruptcy. I worked out deals with most of the significant creditors, but it was a very challenging time, and it went on for years. In fact, I'm still making payments to one of them right now, and that's so it was shattering, and it was very humbling, because I'd always been a hard worker and successful, and I look back and say all those late nights that I, spent working on these projects, traveling around the country, saying, hey, I'm building this kind of mini empire. At the end of it, I had nothing to show for it. And that was very humbling and embarrassing, really, because I was always, kind of a success. And now I was clearly a failure. And it was difficult to, reckon in my mind what had happened and where I'd gone wrong. It was just one of those things where you can work really hard, make the right decisions, make the right moves, and sometimes, other forces appear that make it so that isn't enough.
So right now, somebody is probably listening out there and thinking that to themselves that they should probably not do any real estate or not use any debt. There's some checkpoints in here that you mentioned, that some lessons learned that probably could have prevented the huge collapse. In hindsight, what were some of the things that you probably should have done?
One of them clearly was, the borrowing on the other properties was a mistake. The property should have stood on its own. And if the insurance company wasn't going to pay, then I shouldn't have done any work. And that would have created pressure, but it's pressure that was compounded later on. People saying, hey, why aren't you doing the work? Well, the insurance company isn't paying. And here it looked like things were going okay because I was funding the repairs from my own funds. But then I ran out of money. I should have never started that, because looking back, there were tens of millions of dollars poured into that property between the ice storm and 18 months later when it was closed. And all that money was eventually demolished. I mean, it was all the buildings, all that new, everything new, plumbing, carpets, roofs, everything that was brand new, and in the end, just demolished and taken to the dump. And that is, that's just astounding. I mean, to look back on it, for a while it was really tough to look back and say, oh my gosh, what did happen? And I'll tell you, when I wrote the book was the first time I really took, step by step what happened. People tell me when they read the book, some people cry and some people laugh, in different sections. And I'll tell you, when I was writing the book, I cried and I laughed, and I can guarantee you I know the sections, and it's not like, hey, feel sorry for me. It's really like, this is what happened in my life. Life's not about money. It's about a lot of things, but a lot about family and my relationships. My family always stood by me, but it created challenge. The whole ordeal created challenges all around. I made it through. I wrote the book. It was very therapeutic. Now as I grow the fund, the current American Homeowner Preservation, we had some institutional interest, we have some institutional investors in there now, but it took a little while early on as they started hearing about, they could do Google searches about Woodland Meadows, Columbus, Ohio, Jorge Newbery, and you say, oh my God, this guy looks like some of the news stories are not flattering at all. That's probably nicely put. Realize that that's part of a public smear campaign against me. And I could say that, I could write an explanation letter, but it didn't resonate as much until I wrote the book. And now people read the book and say, people come up to me at conferences and whatnot and say, or message me on Facebook, hey, I love the book. I had whatever failure they had in their life, real estate or otherwise. And, I found the book inspirational in terms of moving on from that your life doesn't end based on your biggest failure. It's something I can reflect on and hopefully prove based on that experience. And I think the new company, the reason I'm good at resolving debt problems is because I was in massive debt problems. So to answer your question specifically, not borrowing on other properties would have been wise and something I probably wouldn't do again. I'd let each company or each building stand on its own. The other thing I would probably do differently, I was tunnel vision. I was always like, I have a vision of how it's going to work out, and this is how it's going to work out. And here I had so many forces that were going against me. I should have recognized earlier on and tried to make some kind of deal with the city. They offered, they did make an offer early on that I could move. And I didn't realize why they were making the offer, but I was summoned downtown by the mayor, and they made an offer that they would try to facilitate relocating the HUD contract to another property if I could find another one in the city of Columbus, which I could have done, or several even, and then I'd abandon this property, which in retrospect would have been a good move. But the problem was that I had sold low-income housing tax credits on this property, and those wouldn't move, and I had sold those with, I was due to get $1 million a year for 8 years from the sale of those credits, and all I had to do was keep the property 80% occupied. So if I moved, I'd have lost the $8 million, but that was $8 million that I would have earned. But I'd still have, a HUD contract on some new properties. I could have used the insurance money and probably just settled with the insurance company for a lesser amount because I wasn't going to rebuild the property, but there would have still been some settlement, which I could have then used. I wouldn't have hit a home run, but I probably still done okay, and certainly not lost the millions and millions that I lost. And but it's easy in retrospect. It's kind of easy to say I should have done this, should have done that. So being open, having less tunnel vision and more open. I was on uncharted territory. Have my eyes wider open and saying, hey, I'm going to do it, here's the crazy thing. All the things that drove my success, my optimism, my hard work, those are the things that powered my success in building this mini empire. But those are the same things that powered my collapse. because I was optimistic. I worked really hard, but with tunnel vision, I was just going forward, and I'm gonna make this work, and I was convinced I was gonna make this work, almost to the end when they started handing out the vouchers, and I was saying, oh my God, maybe this isn't going to work. It was tough, but those are the things, those are a couple things learned from that. Hopefully they're certainly not mistakes I think I would repeat in the same situation. I do reflect on, decisions that I made there, and, things come up in life and you say, well, I did it that way before, and, hey, maybe I'll do it a little differently this time.
Take me back to that moment where, after they were patching out the vouchers and you figure out what was happening and you went whatever in the hole there. How did you pick yourself up personally? I mean, just thinking if some other investor just loses all their properties and, gets a lawsuit and has to start from nothing or negative, what did you think? What did you do?
So I was living in Columbus, and I still had a property in Dayton, Ohio. So Columbus, I was the last person to move out, and I said, well, I'll move into this one in Dayton, which I still own, but it was in foreclosure. And I moved into, this low-income housing apartment complex, which I'd always made a habit of living at the complexes, which was another ingredient to success, although it was, and I never lived like a high luxury life. I always lived spartanly, which maximized the dollars that I had to do deals, which is what for me was really rewarding.
And since you're personally guaranteeing these loans, I mean, they could go after any other proproperties you owned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other LLCs.
And they did, they have, and that was so. I was getting hit with lawsuits, summons. I remember being in court, and there were, on Woodland Meadows, and there were process servers, they're kind of lining up to serve me on other lawsuits. So it was just an unbelievable time. So how did I pick myself up? There was a little while.
What was the mental dialogue you were thinking at that time?
In the back of my mind, I was thinking, hey, I had cause to sue the city. I just didn't have any money to pay legal fees, and attorneys were telling me you need $250,000 to sue the city. And I just didn't have it, and they would have fought it. So it was something in my mind where I say, well, that's how I'm going to recover some of this money, and that never happened because I just didn't have the money, and to go up against the city, and they were just slamming me in the press. The mayor had publicly declared war against me personally. They called Woodland Meadows public enemy number one. It was difficult and humbling because those things. I remember one of my cousins saw one of the really negative articles and emailed it to my dad. And, my dad called me and said, hey, what's this? And, I kind of told him, but I tried to not tell him the worst stuff and, some of the things they were saying. And that was really tough. Your parents, my dad always, you always want to make your parents proud. And do, I don't know, that not so much to say, hey, how great he's doing, but just to know that you're okay, that you're happy. I think that's what most parents want for their kids. Here, I think they were concerned that I was unhappy, which, losing all my money, being, all these negative newspaper headlines. I think they worried about me. I think and that was really tough. And I tried, I always tried to soften it, but I think they knew, and that was probably the worst part. Looking back,
what if I lost all my properties and I called you up? I guess what would you tell me? I mean, what?
Over time, I kind of just wanted to gain some kind of balance. So I was always I've been a real estate broker's license for years. So I brokered some deals in 2007, made a little money, to survive. And, some of the deals I brokered some apartment deals, some of the commissions were big. And I remember I sold a property in Mississippi. The commission was like $200,000. Okay. That was really nice. Now I still was, but I'll tell you, I got that check and I shouldn't have done what I did, but most of that money went to creditors to pay people. And I owed $26 million and I get a $200,000 check, and I probably kept like 10 for my expenses that I was anticipating, and the other 190 I paid to creditors. But 190 on $26 million, it didn't do anything. And what I should have done was just kept the 200 and kind of give me a little bit of a cushion. And I brokered some other deals that were smaller and still okay, but I was still the mindset that I was, if I'm going to come out of this, I got to pay everybody back, clean the slate, and over $26 million. It just. Again, I was being optimistic, probably too optimistic. So I think in 2008, I was okay. Now some of the news was kind of getting a little bit old. Started this company in May of 2008. in a real small office. I moved to Cincinnati. I was in Columbus, and I moved to Cincinnati and then Dayton, and then I moved to Cincinnati and said, okay, I'm going to start fresh. It was me and 2 other people. I hired 2 employees, and we started this. And, we started at the beginning, it was really slow. I was always optimistic it would take off pretty fast. It went kind of slow, but it gained some traction. We started making a little bit of money. And then it's grown, and then by 2011, we were a hedge fund. And then 2013, we started raising money online as soon as crowdfunding became permissible for investments. And then, this last summer, we were qualified by the SEC to offer under Regulation A+, which allows us to accept investments from accredited and non-accredited investors. We now have a minimum investment of $100. So the goal is to make it very, very accessible to just about anyone can invest. And that is, and even start with $100, which is people can, that's dinner and a movie for a family on the weekend. So let me throw $100 and just see how this works. And I think most people start with larger amounts, but even they start with 100, they start seeing results, and then they say, oh, this is pretty good, and put more in it, or tell their friends and family. So it's grown and it's growing. And now I really use the story of my chaos, my financial chaos, to let people know why it ties in with what I do now very, very well. And I think looking back, that the one thing, there's probably a few things, but one big thing that I came out of it is, I can buy bad debt, approach families in a manner that I can directly relate to those families. I know what they're feeling, and if I can give them a deal right up front, you don't have to fight me to get a deal. I'll share some of the discount with you. I'll make it as attractive as possible. People actually get our letters and they think that they're too good to be true, that it's a scam. Hey, yeah, right, this company bought the loan and they're going to forgive $40,000 in delinquency for $2,000. That's too good to be true. It goes in the trash. That's one of our, it's funny that we actually, our deals are sometimes, people don't, they don't realize that we probably just paid $15,000 for your $100,000 loan. So we can, by taking that $2,000 and $500 a month, we're making money, but it's not evident. People sometimes think it's a scam. That eventually most of them come around because we may have to start serving some kind of legal notice, beginning of starting foreclosure. They don't respond to work with debtors, but until you've actually gone through it and you know exactly what they're feeling, and you know that the people are they're lying in bed at night, tossing and turning, can't get to sleep. I used to grind my teeth, which is I never ground my teeth before this. I haven't since, luckily, but during that period I was grinding my teeth. And grinding my teeth, like not just like a little bit, like bad enough that a couple of years ago I could afford this surgery that to kind of repair some of the damage. It's not a good thing, but it's kind of like I went through it. I wanted to repair it as best I could. I had this gum graft surgery where they kind of repair some of the damage from that, but it manifests itself in all kinds of ways, and I can relate because this country right now, I'm going a little off topic, but the country right now is very challenged. A lot of people having trouble finding work, or having trouble work that pays the money that they think that they're accustomed to living on. For the majority of Americans, wages are either flat or have dropped, and the cost of living continue to go up. So that presents a huge challenge for many, that these people who the majority of Americans who, I think the statistic is 76% live paycheck to paycheck, 43% spend more than they make. Those are horrifying statistics in this country, where there is so much wealth in this country, but it's so concentrated in the top. And I think that's, for your listeners, the opportunity to go on your own and kind of create your own destiny. That sounds cliche as I say it, but it really is something that's gives you a lot of control over the future, because you say, hey, the days of the going to work for the company and staying there for 20 years or 30 years, those are diminishing.
I think it's fascinating that you create this fund to help people in debt or foreclosure. I think in the Bible it says, if you're suffering from disease, help somebody that's suffering from this, disease too, or if you basically got this problem, find someone with the same problem and help them out. So in a way, you're kind of doing the same thing here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I've read that passage or heard it before, and that is absolutely right. You become good at something and share it. And it's odd, not that many people have been through the same debt crisis as I have. It's certainly to the magnitude. And, I guess I'm now in a fortunate position of being able to share that experience to bet. This is it's kind of a cool situation. It's not that common where it's win-win. Usually there's a loser, and especially with Wall Street, there's, Wall Street wins, consumer loses. It seems like it's almost like a rigged game, where the consumer always loses. And here, the bank or Wall Street, is kind of nice, is actually losing when they sell the loans. Now, in fairness, we're paying what they would get from another fund. They're not giving them us any big discount any discount more than they give to some other buyer. So we're buying these, and then we're able to generate big returns for our investors, and we're able to generate transformative solutions for the families. So everyone wins. It's kind of I'm a little bit of a people pleaser, and it's kind of cool that I'm not. And here, there's no loser. It's kind of fun.
Have you pulled yourself out of that 28 million hole yet?
I have one big debt that I'm still paying on, and it was $8 million. I made a deal at a discount. I make payments on it, but the payments are significant, and I'll be done with it next year, at the end of next year, which would be nice. But yeah, so I'm almost out of it.
People are probably wondering, why didn't you just do bankruptcy?
And it's in the book. I actually met with an attorney, did all the paperwork on the way to the office to sign it, on the way to the attorney's office to sign it, and I couldn't do it. And actually reading the book, it was almost a low point. But I was driving there, and I pulled over, and I couldn't do it. And I called him and said, I can't. I'm not going to do it. I'm coming in, and I never did it. And at the time, I was still optimistic that I would turn it around. I mean, I would still recover more rapidly than I did. I was thinking, hey, if I filed bankruptcy, that's like a pretty bad mark to have on your record for 10 years. And, as it is, my credit's pretty bad anyway, or was bad for several years. It's probably improving a little bit now. But that was bankruptcy would have been a much easier route. It just didn't seem right. And it's personally, I just couldn't do it. And I tell people, friends and family in the same, people that run into a situation, hey, I'm in trouble with my mortgage. I'm always like, hey, make a deal with your creditor. You have leverage. The fact that you're not paying, kind of creates this leverage which you can use to make a deal that makes sense versus just filing bankruptcy. And then I don't know. There's bankruptcy seems like this panacea, and it really it can be helpful. Certainly Trump's filed a number of bankruptcies. There's also, it's not all easy, and I just made the decision not to do it.
For someone who's gone high and then now low and just about getting back to even, what is your simple passive cash flow number? What's the monthly cash flow that you'd like to see to be happy?
Well, the best part of that question is to be happy. So the reality, here's what's really difficult for me is I used to make remarkable amounts of money, and now I do okay. But I'm not making the same as I was 12, 13 years ago, which is a little frustrating and humbling. And I'm hoping to get back up to those numbers, but it changes the perspective. I was excited the first time I made 10 grand in a month. And then I was excited the first time I made 100 grand in a month, and then, a few hundred grand in a month. So now when you have a month where you say, hey, I just made, whatever the number is, I remember 13 years ago when I made XXX. So the reality is, to be happy, I probably only need a much smaller number. It doesn't have to be that big to be comfortable. And, when I made 10 grand in a month, which was probably, I'm 51 now, I probably first made 10 grand in a month when I was maybe 26 or 27. And I probably first made 100 grand in a month when I was in my early 30s. And so the numbers, it's hard to put a number. Right now, I still live pretty Spartan-like. I'm married now, so there's a little bit more of an expense, but my wife is also doesn't desire to live in the lap of luxury. We're fine with fairly simple, a simple lifestyle. So we don't need that much. And it's really hard to put a number. The number is going to be a lot bigger than what I need, just because of perception of what I know I've done and it's a measuring stick. It's more than anything, to say that I'm making this amount of money each month, or tough to answer that question. Certainly, 100 a month is, at this point, seems like, I don't know, it's tough to say the numbers, but the number to get by is probably 10 grand a month, and to be pretty comfortable. The number to be, because of my measuring stick, is probably much more near well into the six figures, just because I've been there and I want to do better than I've done in the past. And tough to say. I don't want to say I'm greedy. It's not greedy. It's the measuring stick thing. Does that make sense to you, Lane?
I think it does. I think the important thing is that you're always increasing it.
Yeah, agreed. That's the problem, is because it decreased, and that's I guess where it went wrong. You like to think through your life you'll steadily make more and more, just because your experience and your talents become more and more refined. But in reality, especially as you get to bigger numbers, it's not. or at least in my experience, it didn't work out that way. It did for a while, but didn't in the end.
Is something that you recently thought about burning your cash on for a time savings or an improvement in quality of life?
So I'm going to Costa Rica at the end of December for a week with my wife. We're staying at a nice hotel, but still the whole thing is going to be a few $1,000s. When we go on trips, we go hiking, which you can't even spend that much money hiking. You take some oranges and some figs or dates or something like that. You're not blowing your cash. But I guess we stayed in like a 4-star hotel, which was a couple $100s a night. I would be tempted to stay in like a slightly more affordable hotel, and $200 a night. I mean, $200 a night, $200 a night for me is a lot. I'm just like, oh man. But my wife, no, so that's one thing. I guess from our perspective, we're actually splurging a little bit, even though it really doesn't seem like it. But God, we don't have a car. We walk to work. We live right near work. Our apartments where we live is pretty decent. I mean, it's nice, but God, my wife, I'll tell you, my birthday, Christmas, she's saying, what should I get you? And she usually comes up with good things. Last year she came up with, it was like a home run present, but it wasn't that expensive. She got me dual monitors for my, when I work at home. I have dual monitors at work. It's great. And she got them at home, and that was a very thoughtful gift. I hadn't even thought about doing it, and it just makes it much more efficient to work. The year before she got me a coat, a nice coat, probably $700 from Brooks Brothers. So we're not exact. So I don't even know. If I had more money, and it's not even having more money, it's really if I can manage my time better, which is probably hiring more employees and having more free time. So more free time to spend with my wife, family, doing things I like. I run a lot with friends, more hikes on the weekends, more getaways. That would probably be personally the most rewarding. That would be something that I would strive, and I am trying to strive to do to have more, we have a decent sized team here, but to make sure that to get me out of doing some of the stuff that I don't have to do and free up my time, that would probably be the most valuable gift. Actually, that's, somebody, I'm not sure who said it, but there's, the most precious gift is, and your most valuable possession is time, not money. And, so how much time you spend with your family, how much time you spend with friends or doing things you like, that's the most valuable possession. And that's, so can I create more time, and can I spend money to create more time, or can I build efficiencies in our business or hire people with different skills? Those are things that I guess I'm really focused on doing. And if I had more time, that would presumably, and I think it's not a presumption, I think it's really would lead to a richer life.
Are you the person calling up the mortgage people and negotiating their loans?
No, I'm not. Luckily, I at the early on I did that, but as now I've built a kind of a formulaic strategy that others can execute. So I get involved when there's a problem, and even then I shouldn't, but I do. And we're actually just having this discussion today. So these loans, look at them. If you buy 100 loans, you put them on a conveyor belt. 85 will get to the other side and kind of go down the pathway. There's an established set of guidelines that the team knows what to do. Now, the problem is about 10, 15, maybe even 20 loans will drop off the conveyor belt. And these are the ones, and once they drop off, they're just stuck. And those are the loans that have issues that I get involved with. So I get involved with the problems. And what I'm trying to do, and we were discussing that this morning, is how, and I need to do this, is I need to take the strategies for those, what are the most common reasons for those loans falling off the proverbial conveyor belt, and then design kind of template formulaic strategies to get those back on the conveyor belt.
Like an exception protocol or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I can establish that protocol and train someone to do that, then 80% of those will get back on the conveyor belt and someone else will be running them instead of me getting involved in those. And then there'll be the final ones, which are just big problems, which then I would work on just the smallest ones, which would free up my time, because I do spend a disproportionate time on these loans. There's some that have big problems, and I'm pretty good at solving them, but I can share that knowledge and actually give someone else that and free up my time to do other things that are probably more valuable to the company.
All right, so time is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So our last question here is, so Tony Robbins identifies two large concepts that we're continually struggling to gain perfection in. The first is the art of fulfillment, and the second is the science of achievement. So if you died tomorrow and I were to email this to your kids a couple decades later, at that point they would actually listen. What would be first the secret or hack to the science of achievement? How do you achieve the things that you have been doing
hard work, and focus. Here it is, probably hard work, focus, and optimism. Those are probably the three biggest ingredients. And you kind of have to have them all. So you have to work hard. There's no real way to succeed without doing that unless you were born into wealth or marry wealth. But if you're self-made, you have to work hard. And that doesn't mean like slaving away working 18 hours. That means working diligently and predictably. The optimism, to embark on any kind of entrepreneurial business, you always have to be optimistic, because there's going to be times when things aren't going to be that comfortable, things aren't going as planned, and you need to still be optimistic that, hey, I can get through this. There's the proverbial burn zone. You're tested for a period where things are going wrong and not according to plan. And how do I get through there? And you're going to stay optimistic to do that, and you'll be working hard. Another one would be patience. To be patient is probably huge, because things never happen as fast as you want. And if you say, hey, I'm going to be a millionaire in a year, and you're not, but you made some progress towards there, then give it a little more time. And those are things where people set sometimes unrealistic goals, or even if they're realistic and they don't kind of work out as planned, then you want to be able to have the patience to endure and get to the point where you do succeed, or you get at least most of what you wanted. So those are those are a handful of ingredients to success. Now, fulfillment is different in some respects. Maybe it's a byproduct a little bit of that achievement, but being content, this is a struggle for me, and especially due to what's happened in my life, to be content and say that I'm happy with where I am and where I'm going and what I've done. I certainly would tell my kids to do whatever they really enjoy doing. If you have a job you don't like, don't stay there, no matter how well it pays. But if you find something that you're passionate about that can make you a living, do it. And even if it's the oddest, you don't have to go into real estate or securities or something where you say, hey, or being an attorney or a doctor. You can be a success at anything and actually probably make pretty good living at just about anything if you work hard and you become very good at it. They're not always predictable ways to success. So do what you like, because really you get to the end of the day or the end of life and you look back, and if you have a bank account with $1 billion in it, at that point, who really cares? There's a really good book called something about dying, a nurse who worked in an elderly home, and they were the 5 things she learned from the dying. And one of them was, not spending enough time with my family. I wish I had taken more chances and followed kind of their dreams or their passions. These are things, it's predictable. It shouldn't surprise us. But despite knowing that, a lot of people end up saying, well, I'm comfortable enough where I'm at. I may not be that satisfied. It may not be that fulfilling, but maybe I'll start something new next year or next month or in a couple of years, or I'll do it as soon as I get $10,000 saved or $100,000 saved or $1 million saved. There's a point at which you have to say, well, I don't have everything I want. Everything isn't quite aligned, but I have enough that I'm going to take this step. Whatever that step that is towards your big goals, but take it and then figure the rest out. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he's very successful, digital marketer. And, when we were talking about some marketing for AHP, and he was saying, hey, I was thinking like 3 steps ahead. And he said, wait, just focus on the first step. Let's nail that and let's get that super successful. And he says the next step will be, then you focus on the next step. But sometimes people, including me, in this situation that I was doing, well, what happens after we succeed with this? Then what about this? And what do we? Don't think about what's in front of you. And right now, this is our challenge. Maximize that, succeed at that, and then go on to the next step. And that's something easy. Everybody's prone to doing it and saying, well, let me just wait for some other things to better align. And that alignment never happens, and then they never embark on whatever journey they want.
Yeah, that regret is the big thing. I think somebody told me the other day that, there's more flowers at somebody's gravestone than like at a wedding or something like that, because regret's the bigger emotion there.
Yeah, can you imagine? I lost my dad in 2013, and I did spend a lot of time with him, so I don't regret. And he was 93, so he lived a full life. A lot of the book touches on some of my relationship with my parents. That time, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no more opportunity. It always seems like, hey, I'll spend more time with him next year or this year. My mom was, after my dad passed away, she moved into an assisted living facility, which it was nice. She just sold the house where they lived. So she had enough money, and it was a comfortable one, but she had all the comfort she could want. Not to say it was luxurious, but she had all the comfort she would want. But she got lonely. She was no longer as part of a household where there's a family around, family members and what. People would go and visit. I would visit. My siblings would visit. But it wasn't the same. Earlier this year, she was kind of not doing that well. And I thought it was a lot of just being lonely. And so I invited her to live with us. She jumped at the chance, and she moved in with us in June, and she's 90. Actually, her birthday is tomorrow, and she will be 93. That's time. I see her I don't even spend that much time with her, but just seeing her every evening and every morning, and then on the weekends a little bit, maybe we'll watch a movie sometimes and eat together. I mean, those are irreplaceable moments. Easy to say, hey, it's tough, especially my wife is extremely accommodating on the situation, but it's good time together with my mom. And she spent a lot of time and sacrificed for all the kids. We had 5 kids for a long time, and now, kind of giving back a little bit. So I guess that's one example of something. I don't know if I could have done that 10 years ago or 12 years ago. I was just running too fast, and now I'm probably running a little bit slower, and I could recognize that that's something that's valuable.
All right, George. So anything we miss, you want to give out your contact information?
Sure. So if you have any interest in learning more about American Homeowner Preservation, you can go to ahpfund.com. The name of the company is American Homeowner Preservation. Again, ahpfund.com. We welcome you to invest. We welcome you to invest with $100, and you can be non-accredited or accredited. Everybody's welcome. The book is Burn Zones. I made a deal with Lane. We're going to give all the listeners that are interested a free paperback copy. We'll mail it to you. Contact Lane, and then he'll get us the addresses, and we'll ship it out. You can look on Amazon. It has some great reviews, and I think it's something that hopefully you'll take away some knowledge and enjoy the book.
Shoot me an email, lane@simplepassivecashflow.com, and let me know how things are going, how I can help you guys. Thanks, George, for joining us. I got this book right here on the stand here. You, some dude riding a bike. I don't know who that is.
That's me when I used to race bikes.
But yeah, it's interesting that this burn zone term is now a hashtag now. Me and my business friends like to use the term.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I'm glad to hear it.
We just did this little private lending deal, about 60-something grand a couple weeks ago. And, we joked a little bit about, hey, this isn't going to be another burn zone, is it? So you left some impression on us.
I'm glad to hear that.
All right, George. Well, thanks again. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Talk to you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
This website offers very general information concerning real estate for investment purposes. Every investor situation is unique. Always seek the services of licensed third-party appraisers and inspectors to verify the value and condition of any property you intend to purchase. Use the services of professional title and escrow companies and licensed tax, investment, and or legal advisor before relying on any information contained herein. Information is not guaranteed, as in every investment there is risk. The content found here is just my opinion, and things change, and I reserve the right to change my mind. Above all else, do your own analysis and think for yourself, because in the end, you are the only person who is going to look out for your best interests.